Today, I had the opportunity to talk to Kieren Westwood about his latest novel titled Project Ventus. But we talk about many other things as well. We talk about what got him into writing. We talk about his YouTube channel that is dedicated to the craft of writing. We talk about his editing service. And we geek out on story quite a bit as well. I will drop links to everything he is doing down in the description below, so I highly suggest you check that out. But before we begin, I'm going to give a copy away of Project Ventus, but you have to answer a question. And that question is, when Kieren writes his first draft, what draft does he treat it as? The first person who answers that question down below will win a copy, either paperback or ebook, of Project Ventus. So I hope you pay very close attention to this interview. And without further ado, here is my chat with Kieren Westwood. Kieren, thank you so much for taking the time out of your busy schedule, I'm sure, to chat with me. Yeah, of course, man.
Absolutely.
So you have a lot going on. So you're a writer, you do YouTube, you have an editing service. So rather than me asking you, hey, tell us a little about yourself, let's kind of take those piece by piece and see where it leads. Sure. So my first question is, writing. What got you into it? Like, why do you love it?
It's a good question. I don't actually think I've been asked before and anything like this, but I actually got into it way later than I should have, because I started writing stories and little poems when I was in school, and I never thought anything of it. I never thought this could be an actual thing to pursue or try and spend any time doing. So it took until I got to university and I was kind of bored. I did a degree in English, but it was all very much like Renaissance text and stuff like that, which didn't interest me usually, but English was a safe bet because I thought I was reasonably good at it and I probably wouldn't fail. And then I took a couple of modules. One of them was like the art of short story writing. So I thought I'm gonna take that, see what happens. And then I they asked us to write a 2,000 word short story for an end of year thing. I wrote 10,000 words and then had to figure out how to cut that down. I was like, man, maybe there's something to this. So from there, I just wrote more short fiction, tried a novel while I was at university and it was a total mess. And then since then, I just haven't stopped really. My wife, Haley, actually encouraged me more than anybody else, because I'd done it at university, but then when I got back, I tried writing a story and I thought, I'll show her and see what she says. And she was like, keep doing this, keep doing it. So if it weren't for her, then maybe I would never have carried on. But since then, I just wrote a bunch of novels because I was just desperate to get out of my day job. Still in that situation, but it's just something that I love doing really. And reading as well, obviously, has informed that the whole way through. I was always reading when I was younger, not particularly stuff that necessarily influenced my writing today, but just the practice of it and just understanding storytelling to a certain extent, I suppose, to the same extent we all understand storytelling. But yeah, I could have got into it younger, and sometimes I wish I had, but I'm here now and I love it. So that's all that counts, right?
Yeah, it reminds me of one of my favorite writers, actually, Donald Ray Pollock. I don't know if you're familiar with his work, but he didn't start writing until I think in his 50s.
Right.
And he's created some of the most just striking pieces of fiction I've ever read. For me personally, and it really begs the question of, once you've lived a full life, you bring all that into your fiction. So sometimes when you start too early and you haven't experienced things, it might feel a little flat. Granted, there are plenty of exceptions, but
definitely, I think that intersects with the old "write what you know" adage, I suppose, doesn't it? Because if you know an awful lot more by the time you're that age than you do when you're 18 or whatever, even if you're not directly writing about your own life, you just have lived longer and experienced more. And I like the human condition is a big part of the things that I try to get at with my writing. And I think by the time you're that age, you will have a much more of an understanding of that than you would maybe when you were younger, speaking generally anyway.
Yeah, for sure. You mentioned your wife briefly. So she appears to be, or seems to be anyway, your first reader. Is that accurate?
Yeah, every time. Yeah, 100%. I'll give her, once the first draft's finished, I don't polish it at all. I just send it her way because she's just lovely and tactful and encouraging and optimistic. So she's willing to read anything. And usually the mark of quality, I know when a story is ready or when it's decent enough, if it makes her cry. If I can manage to make her cry, then I'm thinking,
Oh, wow.
that really sounds bad when I say it like that. But you know what I mean? When I manage to move her emotionally, I don't mean like, yes, I made my wife cry. I mean like when I,
Cry for the right reasons, I guess we should say, right?
exactly. Not out of sadness. I hope it's not out of sadness.
Yeah.
But
Or not, oh man, this is so bad. This is making me
how am I going to tell him? How am I married to this guy? No, crying in a good way is a good thing. But also, she's watertight on plot. If there's a plot hole, or if you've got a secret, if you've got a twist coming, forget it. She's seen it. She knows it. So if I can get a twist past her, then I know I'm onto a good thing, which is why I don't really write twists, because I can't get one past her.
I'm really bad with plot. But does she read a lot and watch film a lot, and is that kind of where she?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. She was for a time. She was a book blogger, and so she's got a room just back there that was a library. Essentially, it's filled with books, but she's always reading. She reads many hundreds of books, more than I do every year. Wow. She loves it. It's her main, relaxation pursuit. There's always a book in her hand. So she's pretty, broad across the genres as well. So there's a lot that I really value her expertise on things. And generally, if she recommends a book to me, she'll say, "Oh, you'll love this," and I start it, and I think, I don't love this more. She's like, "Keep reading it," and then I'm like, "This book's one of my favorite books ever." So she helps an awful lot with the writing stuff.
That's
as well.
Great, because that's often like the hardest thing is when do you share it with somebody, and then also if it is a spouse or a family member, you wonder, are you really telling me the truth, or is the sugar coated? So that's awesome that you have that.
Yeah, you never can tell but. Yeah, she's pretty honest, I think.
That's great. So you write, but you also have an editing service. So what's that about? Like, what got you into that? Why did you want to do it?
It's weird because it is an editing service, and I'm happy to work with writers from all abilities or all experience levels. But there's an element of support and encouragement to it, which I don't necessarily think is in all editing. And that's what I'm hearing from people when they come back to me anyway, that they're like, I found it really encouraging. I just like helping people, as corny as that sounds. And, I'm getting paid for it as well. So, that obviously works, but I just enjoy seeing progression in people. So I have novel, I never know whether to call them clients or customers or what, so just call them writers that I work with or whatever. Mm-hmm. Sometimes I have entire novels at once and I'll edit the whole thing. And other times I have week by week, they'll send me new chapters or whatever they've worked on, and seeing the progression from where they started to where they got to is there's something about that I really love. So I can pick up something about their writing and say, try changing this, or what you could do is this, and then seeing them put that into practice and it's much better than the first attempt that they made. There's something really satisfying to it. But I also try and keep that distance, because it's not about how I would write something necessarily. It's about how anybody could write something, but it's just about try to figure out if something doesn't work. That's definitely a thing that I'm going to pick up. But if it's just not quite how I would approach something, I want to keep that intact, because that's an integral part of how they write. But I love it. I want to get to a point in my life where my writing in one way or another can support me full time, so I don't have to have the day job that I've got as well. Mm-hmm. And jumping in and doing something like editing is a way to get towards that, because I don't really plan on doing it through book sales or traditional publishing or anything like that. So this is just more real, and it has that added bonus of where I can feel like I'm doing a good job for people and helping them become better writers if I possibly can. Mm-hmm. So that's the main draw for me for that.
I also find that, and maybe you're the same way, but whenever I review people's stuff, when they ask me to look at it, I find that it helps me. Like articulating things help me in my own work.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. There's nameless concepts that you come across that you suddenly have to be head to head with and think, I need to know how to explain this to a person. So I have to know how to explain it to myself first. Mm-hmm. Absolutely.
Yeah. Which brings me to your YouTube channel. So you have a pretty successful YouTube channel. I think so anyway.
Yeah, and I like it.
You like it? Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, it's all right.
I've been a fan for a long time. I've loved all your work.
Thanks, man.
And So the old adage, if you really want to learn something, teach it. I guess,
Yeah.
was that part of the inspiration of starting the YouTube channel, or like, why did you decide to do it?
No, it was a totally separate route that I was going down originally. And I've got a really, really cringeworthy first video where I introduced myself to the world on an iPhone camera. And it was supposed to be tracking my journey from being, an unknown nobody writer to getting traditionally published. That was the goal for it. And because I thought to myself, I'm gonna have to do something differently. So maybe if I can attract a few followers and stuff, that'll help me get published because they, I don't know, agents like that or whatever. So it started like that. And then I thought, well, if the vlogging thing wasn't for me. I wasn't going to just record myself writing and be like, oh, I wrote 2,000 words today or whatever. There's people that do that, but they are way more engaging, bubbly, enjoyable people to watch than I am. So I thought, well, I've been writing for 10 or 15 years, however long it was when I started. I've probably got something I can show for people. And then as soon as I started doing that, I thought, well, I have actually got things I can say. And as long as I make sure that at no point do I say, this is how you do it, forget everything you've ever heard, this is the way. As long as I always say, this is just my opinion, or this works for me, so maybe try it, then I'll be okay. So that's what I do. And it didn't really occur to me I was teaching anything until I was interviewed by a different YouTuber, and he said, did you set out to teach people? And I was like, am I teaching people? I didn't really realize I was doing that. I was just making things that I thought were interesting and might help, but I didn't put two and two together really. But no, it definitely wasn't teaching that encouraged me to start, but it's definitely teaching that helps me keep going and helps me figure out what to make videos about, because that's the age-old question when you're a content creator or whatever. And then I obviously realized that I pretty much love that. It folds right in with the editing where I can help people get better about things. And you see those comments that are like, this helped me, or, I tried this and it really worked for me, and it makes all the difference. But,
Yeah. Yeah. And it's so difficult because there's so many craft books. There's so many, I don't know, just anecdotes that it's difficult to parse. And one thing I've noticed about your channel is that you distill all of that down into easy digestible content, which is great. Some of my favorite ones are the what so-and-so can teach us about writing or whatever it may be, like Stephen King or whoever it might be.
yeah, I like those because everyone can read the tips, and you could have 10 writers in a room and you could all read the tips and you'll all take something slightly different from that. So all I'm trying to do is add another writer's perspective on top of what the famous person who's really good for search results can already provide. I do get the odd comment that's like, this is supposed to be Stephen King's advice and all is this British guy talking a load of, and I'm like, well, yeah, but it adds something for somebody. So
yeah, well, I've noticed in all the tips, you don't just list the tips, but you actually provide examples, so you give it context, which I think is helpful, because so much of writing advice that I've found is incredibly repetitive. And sometimes you don't know, like, okay, well, what do they truly mean by that? And so that really helps give it some backbone to it.
And there's this common advice out there that I don't believe and doesn't work for me. Well, not that I don't believe, but doesn't work for me. And something that a lot of writers don't know when they start out is that everything is optional. The classic one that's write every day doesn't work for me. It's never worked for me. But it's a lot of new writers don't know that it's okay to not write every day if you don't want to, or to only write when the mood takes you or something, because it can be, nobody tells them this stuff, that it's just a given. And they, if you think I'm going to try and write a story today, and then you see Stephen King says write every day, you're going to trust Stephen King. You're not going to go, I'm sure I understand what this is better than he does. So to have someone in the middle go, actually make sure you listen to yourself, because your own point of view is valid as well. That's what I'm trying to do. It's like supporting and encouraging people to let them know that they have something, even if they've never started before, they still have something valuable to put into their own writing, and you don't just have to follow somebody else's course. That's kind of what I was doing with the whole YouTube channel, because I consider myself nobody. I'm just another writer like everybody else. So, I'm saying any writer can just choose what they want to do and go along with it. And this doesn't work for me, it might work for you. Whatever the case, it doesn't really matter. It's, if it works and it gets words down on the page, fine, go with it.
Yeah. So I guess speaking of daily writing habits, hitting word counts, what works for you? What is your process like?
A routine of having no routine whatsoever. It's weird. Like, if I'm writing a novel, I have a really strong like routine. I wake up at 6 a.m. I write for like an hour or something, which I don't know how good of an idea that is when you're not really firing on all cylinders between 6 and 7. But again, day job and all that, it's the only time I get to really put words into that. And then if I can keep doing it like that, I get enough motivation from the daily writing to finish the whole thing, and enough momentum, I should say. I've always got the motivation. So that helps with a big project. But small, short fiction and stuff like that just comes as and when. Like, I wrote a short story, it was about 2,000 or 3,000 words in an afternoon the other day, just because something just occurred to me, and I was like, I'll just write this now. So I just did it there and then with no routine whatsoever. So I'm kind of right in the middle of the spectrum, where routine does work for me when I want to use it, but also being completely, sporadic and going with whatever the mood takes me. That also works for me as well. I don't have a set routine most of the time. I probably should, because I think it might help regulate things a little bit, but I'm at the point where I'm not aiming to get traditionally published and stuff. So finishing stuff and getting it out there is a great thing. It's a regulating thing, and it's good for authenticity and stuff if you're talking about writing. But it's not a goal. I'm not like, I have to get this novel finished by this time because it's got to go out and it's got to be sold or whatever. Mm-hmm. It gets done when it gets done. So as long as I'm keeping my hand in, I don't really mind what I do with it.
Yeah, I always struggle with, do I follow the muse? Because I have a really big problem with finishing stuff. So I can get a draft out. Not that it's easy to get a draft out, but
yeah,
then something will hit me. I'll say, oh, wow, I get this idea pops into my head, and I want to chase it. And inevitably that leads to me having a bunch of drafts that never see the light of day because I'm constantly chasing the new idea. You mentioned you just the other day wrote a short story that was a few thousand words. And do you have a novel going on right now? And how do you like balance sort of longer form, like ongoing projects with just, chasing the muse when it strikes?
I suffer from the same thing. I have 3 novels right now, but none of them have got off the ground yet. They're all like 3,000 words. One of them was basically an offshoot of that, turned into that short story of the day. And I was like, oh, this is what I should have been writing when I was trying to write that. So that's probably put to bed now. It turns out it was a short story and not a novel, which is, sometimes a hard lesson to learn with novel writing, but one that needs to be learned. And other things I've got, they're just sitting there. They're kind of waiting. When one really takes hold, that's it. Then I'll just write nothing but that the entire time. I'm very simple. I can't manage multiple projects. If I'm trying to write something like a series of short stories or something like Gold Fury, which was my novella in Flash, I can write that, but entertain nothing else at the same time. And there does come a point where the magic goes, and maybe you see some magic in something else, and I'm the same as you with that. I'm like, oh, that's a really good idea. And it's so tempting to think, oh, I'll chase the magic and I'll go and write that and I'll finish that. But after a certain point, you kind of know that you need to carry on and push through the dark times and try and finish this longer thing, because it's probably worth finishing. And Project Ventus was one of those things. Like, got halfway through it and then had other ideas for other things, but I just kept at it, and the magic ended up coming back at some point, thank God, and ended up finishing it, even though it was the longest book I've written.
It's a long book, and I think that's a great segue.
One, yeah.
That's a great segue to move on to Project Ventus, this novel right here. So what the hell is this thing, man? Like, what inspired it? So I've read Gold Fury, and I feel like, just like you, and maybe I'm speaking, too soon, but I love so many genres. So I don't. I read many genres. I watch many films, different genres, and so I want to explore all of these genres. Gold Fury is a very different book than this one right here. So I guess what inspired it? How did it begin?
Yeah, began, I think, I read a book called Dead Mountain, which was about the Dyatlov Pass incident. And if for anyone who doesn't know, it's like a weird, unsolved mystery from Soviet Russia where a bunch of kids just acted really strangely on a camping trip and leading to their death, and nobody knows quite what happened. One of the theories from that is infrasound, sort of, not really though, but I thought, well, there's maybe a story in that. And then there was another incident, I think it's called like the Havana incident or something, which was just a few years ago now, where a bunch of diplomats in Havana started feeling really strange and suffering these strange symptoms. So both of those things combined together, and I thought, oh, there's a story in that somewhere. And then I just, as usual, I don't really plan anything, maybe plan an ending, and then the rest of it just comes to me as I go along. And then I plan a little bit, and then I catch up with myself, and then I plan a bit more and I catch up. So I just figured the rest out after the initial idea came. But yeah, definitely different to Gold Fury, because I had an idea with that and it had an end point with it, but Ventus didn't. I was just thinking, I'll just see what happens with it. Yeah. I wrote the first chapter like 4 years ago, and it didn't go in the direction I was thinking it was going, but I kept it just in case. And then I came back and reworked it a couple of years ago into something else. And then that set me on the right path with it, and I finished it, luckily.
When you say chapter 1, do you mean the prologue scene, or do you mean the chapter after that?
The chapter after it, which is set in Antarctica, that one, it started off as a different thing altogether. There was like alarm systems going off, and this impending wave of infrasound was supposed to be coming towards this research base, which never ended up happening. It was going to be like a flash forward to the end, and it was, while I was writing the whole book, it was, and I thought, I can't actually get there, and I don't think it's right to get to that point, so I ended up reworking it and changing it all, but it ended up getting me to a coherent story one way or the other, so I just followed it.
You mentioned that you tend to plan a little bit and write, and then until you hit a wall, and then plan more. So this is a multi-POV novel. There's 4 POVs, I believe, technically?
Yeah, I think so.
So how in the hell do you do that? How do you balance the POVs when you're just sort of writing in these spurts or planning in these spurts?
I plan in a really unsophisticated way. So I'll try and write a chapter, for example, and I'll literally just press return about 10 times and write a plan beneath that, which just slowly, steadily becomes larger and larger. So every time I needed to write into a different perspective, I just Control V, pasted my crappy plan underneath the last section and just carried on like that. But I also did use, I used Campfire to write the draft of that. And they have this, this functionality where you can plot little points on a horizontal graph, for want of a better word, in different colors, and you can make it cross over and intersect and stuff. And for the first half of the book, I did that with it as well, to try and keep everything in order and in some sort of system I could understand. But eventually, I once I got into the rhythm of it, I was writing too quickly to keep updating that or to need it, so I just carried on. But I really have to have an end point. And so I tried to think of an end point for each of the characters' POV. And once I have that, then every time I'm with them, I can just move a little bit closer to their end goal. But I really hate going back and changing things once I've written something. I will do it, but going back and like deleting a chapter or changing a whole chapter and stuff, I loathe doing it, which probably means I need to spend some time doing that to fix a hole in my writing. But so I try to avoid that as much as I can. And luckily, I think I only had to do 2 or 3 big changes in editing, because I felt like stuff needed tightening. But if I can avoid doing that, I absolutely will. So that's what I get from planning things. Well, what little I plan anyway.
Yeah, I realize we failed to actually talk about what this book is about. So I guess you were the
Your
best.
Guess is as good as mine.
You're the best person to talk about it. Like what? I guess if you had to, explain to a reader about, what is this book about? What were you trying to do with it? Like, what's the best pitch? No pressure.
Yeah, this is another reason why I'm not going after traditional publishing anymore, because defining what I've written about is really hard. Not because I'm pretentious, but because it's all over the place, honestly. And it doesn't have a target audience or anything like that because whatever. But I guess I knew I wanted a bunch of research bases across the world to be connected by this one task. So that was the premise I had, and they all needed to somehow work together or I don't know, communicate in some way, which didn't really end up happening, to avoid some kind of catastrophe. That was the pitch I pitched to myself when I started writing it. And it evolved from there to include this pseudo-science of infrasound. Infrasound is really a force that does exist. But there's a small amount of scientific research to say that it can affect people's moods and to give you certain symptoms like headaches and buzzing in your ears and stuff like that. And I really just fictionalized that. I went full ahead with that and put in a story about the evil government developing that as a weapon. But it wasn't necessarily meant to say anything or suggest anything, especially about, the US government or anything like that. It wasn't, it's not a political book, but the premise of it and the opening of it really is political because an ambassador gets hit with this weapon, and you think, hang on, this is going to be political, but then it's totally a different thing as it gets going. So the goalposts really just move the entire way through. You asked what is it? I don't know. I don't even know what genre it is really.
Yeah.
I don't know. I call it sci-fi because that's the closest I can get, I think. But there's elements of thriller in it. There's kind of elements of horror in it once or twice. It's just what I fancied writing.
Yeah,
the honest answer.
I love that answer because I feel like so often we are pressured as writers to write to market, as they like to call it, right? You find something, your audience, and you write to that audience, and hopefully, ideally, it will fit within a genre convention of some kind. But when I was reading this, that's and I feel like that's my problem, my own writing too, is why people don't often get it, is because I'm not really writing to genre conventions often. And when I was reading this, I couldn't classify it, but that's like my favorite part, honestly, is that
that's good.
I was like, is this science fiction? Is this a psychological thriller? Does it have horrific elements in it? Is it a deep character study, which I feel like it's all of those things. And I mentioned in my review that I got hints of, Emily St. John Mandel, and I've spied on your bookshelf, and I've seen that you have her books.
I do.
And a little bit of Michael Crichton, because how he kind of used to always take a scientific concept, like in your case, infrasound, and run with it. And try to create hypotheticals of like the what if in the science fiction genre. So was I right at all? Do either of those authors have any influence whatsoever on this book, or is it just kind of maybe in your subconscious?
Emily St. John Mandel does, definitely, because I read Station 11 a few years ago and just really liked it, though I couldn't classify what it was. The only reason I consider it sci-fi is because it won an Arthur C. Clarke Award. Other than that, like, I don't know. But she has that same quality to her work, and like a lot of her, I read her early books, and they are a bit more genre based, I guess, kind of. But then her later stuff, you can tell she's just doing whatever she wants to do with it, which I like. Station 11 is a cut above the others for me. I think it's a better book, and I like the way she tied a graphic novel into it and that kind of thing. But yes, that's definitely influenced it, and I just thought, I'm just going to write the story that I want to write. And because I honestly don't know a lot about genre conventions. I don't talk about it on my channel because I don't have the expertise for it. I couldn't tell you what things are supposed to have or what stories are supposed to have. But that's got me into trouble because I've pitched books to literary agents or sent things across, and a common answer to me is, well, we like the writing, but we don't know what we would do with it. We don't know who we would sell it to, that really annoyed me, to be honest, because I was like, well, isn't that your job to find people who like it? But it's my job to, write something that people like at the same time. So that's why it's not really going to fit for me. But so I kind of wrote Project Ventus out of spite, really. So I was like, I don't care that it's all these different things and it's going to touch on all these different things. I don't mind. I'm just going to write it and see what happens. But people like Emily St. John Mandel definitely influenced the writing of it, because people keep saying my writing is like cinematic in some
Mm-hmm.
way, which I like. I choose to take that as a compliment. Even before, when it's been intended as an insult, I decided to take it as a compliment. And I think there's an element of that in her writing as well. But
Mm-hmm.
besides that, yeah, Michael Crichton I haven't read,
Mm-hmm.
so I can't be accused of stealing anything from that. But but yeah, definitely Station 11.
Yeah, that's cool. So one thing I really noticed again with this book is it's so tied to character. So it's not just that's another interesting thing about this book is that it does have these thriller-esque elements to it, which you think it would be strictly plot based. Like you'd
Yeah.
really lean into the plot, but you do this technique where you are constantly going back in time. You're exploring these characters, so there's a lot of flashbacks.
Yeah.
So what was the thinking there? Were you? I know you said you came up with this infrasound thing. Well, you read an article and then that kind of inspired you. But then, how did you want to? It seems like characterization is really important to you in your fiction, right?
Yeah.
Exploring who these
It,
people are and how they relate to the plot. How did
yeah.
that begin? How did that weave in with the plot?
I find it hard to separate the two, to be honest. I yeah, if everything I write, a plot is my weaker element, no doubt about it, compared to characterization. But something has to happen in a book, ideally, so you have to have plot to some extent, unless you're writing something completely, stream of consciousness literary, which is not my forte whatsoever. So I have that, but all the time that I want to enrich the plot really with character and reasons why people are the way they are and reasons they make certain decisions, or what my interest in this book particularly is what led these people to come to where they are. And I don't necessarily think I did a fantastic job on that, because it was sort of intended. I'd intended to be more into that really, or to lean into that a little more heavily than I ended up doing. But the back and forth thing, which I know some readers will absolutely hate with every fibre of their being, that's okay. But I just found it interesting. It reminded me, once I started going like that with it, it reminded me how much I enjoyed Lost as a TV series, which was years ago. No matter how the ending seasons went down a little bit, the first few series. And my dad said to me at the time, because we were watching it together, he's like, "I'm sick of this. I'm not watching this anymore. They're just jumping back and forth all the time." And I was like, I don't really like that. So I thought, I'm going to do the same thing. I want to keep secrets, so that in the past there's a past timeline that's moving together with the present timeline, so that at the end you have this explosive set of sequences where everything comes out about the past, some of the characters' pasts, and then what's happening to them in the present at the same time. And I wanted to try and link that together as much as I could, because I thought I can't really do plot, but I can do character to a larger extent. So maybe I can make plot out of character a little bit. And that was the aim with that, really. And also, it's just more interesting for me to write if I have multiple timelines of them. I won't just start doing what my wife calls and then, where you just, this happened, then this happened, then this happened. Breaking it up and moving it around just makes it more interesting to read as well as to write, I hope.
Yeah. Did you find that as you discovered who these characters were, that it influenced the plot or changed the plot? Or yeah.
Yeah, most definitely. Yeah. Because like I said, I have maybe an ending in mind for them. So I know which characters are going to end up where. But beyond that, how they get there is a mystery to me as I get going. And I just let them, this sounds really like pretentious, I let my characters be my guide or whatever. But the more you write them, the more you get to know them and to judge what kind of decisions they would make and how they interact with other characters and stuff. And they do start to have personalities of their own, as they should do, if they're supposed to be writing real people or convincing people that you're writing real people. So there are points where I changed idea halfway through, thinking this person's not going to be the hero, or this person is going to be the hero, or they'll redeem themselves or they won't redeem themselves. And plans definitely changed. But I think one of the things that people found difficult about the book is that if you read the prologue, you would assume that the character whose point of view that is from is going to be it's a safe assumption to assume they're going to be the character throughout, and they're actually not. They're the antagonist, if there even is one. But that's just how it felt like it should be to me. I felt like that's where the story was. But I also threw in a bunch of different inserts and interviews and transcripts and stuff, again, to keep things interesting and to show a side of the story that I wouldn't have been able to show otherwise. I've worked myself off in such a tangent now that I forgot what question you asked.
It was, yeah. I mean, it was pretty much just, did you find that the plot would change based on the characters as they develop? Because I find similar things, and it sounds like you're very, very much the same way. Is that because a lot of times when you hear writing advice and they say, "Oh, well, if you're stuck on this part, write something else." I'm like, well, I don't know what happens really.
Yeah.
So I inevitably fall into creating a very loose plot, getting bored with that, and wanting to explore the characters. And it's difficult to kind of move in a nonlinear fashion, at least for me. And it sounds like it's for you too, because you're discovering the story through the characters. Because it's and maybe you write this way, but the way I do it is that I'm literally looking through the eyes of the characters as they plod their way through the plot, and that sort of informs what happens next. You know, I may have these like, tentpole like landmarks and stuff to hit, but outside of that, I don't know.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly the same for me. Do you write chronologically as you go along, like in the events that as they happen in the novel?
Yeah, for sure. I kind of have to, because I don't, however scene X, scene A, let's say, ends, is going to inform scene B, because I haven't yet. I'm planning on writing a multi-POV novel like Project Ventus. Not like it, but normally I write a single POV. And so that makes it even more difficult. Is like, I can't just switch to another POV and start exploring that.
Yeah.
I have to like move linearly through the whole thing. But because you wrote a multi-POV novel, how did you determine the order of things? Because it's not just two. It's not like flipping back and forth. It's going through a lot of different things. And I mean, how did you feel that out with like the sort of the rhythm with the story and the pacing?
It feels like a cop-out to say I don't know, but it just, I knew that I was going to have to cycle through them regularly, and I wanted to make sure, with it jumping around as much as it did, I gave as much order and structure to it as I could, so I was determined to keep them in the same order. So if, I'm not sure, I might have moved things around at the end, but they should be consistently this person, then this person, then this person. And if you discount the interviews and the transcripts and other stuff, it should be a consistent order all the way through.
Oh, okay.
So as much as I could, I held myself to that, and I would write with that in mind, thinking, okay, I need to go to Richard's point of view next. So what happens here in this other person's point of view that might make sense to move to Richard next? So it became a part of the plot, really, that I was going to move to a next character, which is why another reason I found it so annoying and difficult to go back and have to revise things, because the flow of it wouldn't have made sense. And that's the thing with writing chronologically. I don't know how these people do it. I admire it, but the people are like, I write the end first, or I write some of the fight scenes from later on. I write them first, and then I fill in the gaps. I'm like, that's great. I don't know how you would do that. I can't understand it, because like you said, the scene for me has to inform the next scene, even if it's not the same point of view. If I had, even to the extent where if I wrote a reasonably quiet and calm chapter, I might want to pick up the pace a little bit in the next one. So even that has an effect on where it goes. So it had to be in order, very much so. And I even sprinkled in the transcripts and interviews and all the other stuff that I put in there. I wrote those in the order they appear as well. I didn't, because especially the interviews, as they get closer and closer to some kind of truth or some kind of revelation, that was informing what was going on in some of the other point of views as well. That although it's just added interviews, they are as important to the plot as the rest of what happens to the other characters. So that held it together a bit as well.
Yeah, I want to talk about that, because I really love that about the book, and I noticed that as well in Gold Fury, where you're kind of playing with, I guess I could call it formatting for lack of a better lack of a better term, but
Yeah.
you have transcripts, you have interviews, and then sometimes they're formatted as documents, I believe.
Yeah. There's
What's
some
the thinking
articles
behind?
and stuff.
Yeah, what's is it just to break it up, or is it to create? To me, it created, like, I know you said people have said you write cinematically. It did create a very film-like experience for me.
Oh,
These
that's good. It's good
cutaways
to
and
know.
stuff. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's what it is. I read a book called Waking Gods, which was by Sylvain Nouvel. I don't know if you've heard of that, but the whole book is an interview.
Yeah,
It's
I've
just,
read that one. Yeah.
and I thought I didn't love the book necessarily. Like there was a lot of good elements to it, but I thought, well, I've never thought of doing that. But there's no rule against it, especially if
Hmm.
you're not going for traditional publishing and you don't have to explain yourself to anyone. I just liked that they were so easy to put in there and like not easy to write necessarily, but easier than having to input description and all of that other stuff. There's nothing, it's just straight dialogue all the way through. And as soon as I started writing them, I thought this is really quite a interesting writing experience because what if you can avoid really obvious exposition, which I hopefully managed to do for the most part, then
Hmm.
you can reveal elements of the story in different ways and just drop things in the middle of a conversation that will matter or will change the course of the story. But it's just them talking back and forth. Those were some of the most fun chapters for me to write, if I'm perfectly honest, because I just settled into it. The only thing is I needed to make sure I had decent character voices for those, because otherwise
Hmm.
it would get really bland, and they needed to have a good rapport, which is this kind of bitter, sort of pithy back and forth of like of constant hostility, really, but jokes at the same time. I wanted to build a kind of anti camaraderie, I guess, where they're both in
Hmm.
the same situation, but neither of them really necessarily might want to be there. And it was just interesting to slowly reveal things about the characters through only what they said and not what they did. It was an interesting exercise, but mostly, yeah, I did just want to break it up and give a bit of downtime where you could just switch off and read the dialogue for a while
Yeah,
because
yeah.
it's
That's the one
easier.
thing I noticed is that, most people when they write books, it's prose. It's just prose, 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 the same prose throughout. Whereas this, it really helps. It sounded like it helped you anyway with writer fatigue, but then also I think
Definitely.
reading fatigue as well. You might hit one of these interviews and be like, oh yeah, I can. And it kind of just, it's simpler, I guess, to process.
Yeah.
It takes less time. But yeah, I don't see this that often. But again, I read Sleeping Giants. I think that's the
Sleeping
same
Giants, that's
series.
it.
Is that
Waking
it?
Gods is the second
The
one. Yeah,
second
you're
one.
right.
Okay, I did read Sleeping Giants, and where like you said, the entirety of it is a transcript. But yeah, it's a really cool method. Did you have any issues with formatting when you were publishing?
Yeah, it was a nightmare because of the way I originally had it. One character's dialogue was all bold, and the other character's wasn't, or one was
Hmm.
in italics and one wasn't, something like that. And it changed between the ebook version and the print version. I think I can't even remember what I ended up doing with it. Let me have a look with it. But yeah, it was a logistical bit of a nightmare to do because what kept happening was however I was alternating it. I did end up doing bold with one and normal
Hmm.
text with another. But what I would do is forget to change while I was writing it, and then I would lose track of who was talking, and
Yeah.
then the whole conversation wouldn't make sense. And if I caught it quick enough, I could correct it. But there were times where I had to go back and delete 250, 300 words because it just got. I was like, hang on, who's saying that?
I didn't even
Yeah,
think
that was
about
a bit of
that,
a
but
nightmare.
that's, yeah, I didn't think about that. That, yeah, you would quickly lose track of everything. So that's
Yeah.
funny.
The other thing that helped is I had a mechanical keyboard with a macro key on it.
Hmm.
So I programmed one of their names and a colon and then the other one. So I could just press that and then write and then the other one and then write, alternate. So I didn't have to keep typing the character names and
Ah,
stuff in
nice,
as I was drafting it.
nice,
So that helped
nice.
a bit.
A bit.
Yeah.
So did you? go through editing service? Was this something that you edited on your own and just had other people read? What was the process of editing all of this like?
I made my wife edit it. Essentially, though, I really did. I got the first draft there and I gave it to her for an overall, don't bother with spelling errors and all that stuff. Just see how does it make you feel is what I always ask her. If something feels off, tell me, or just write it down or highlight the section. And if something feels, good and you like it, highlight that too. So she did that. And from there, I went back and I edited it myself. And then I would print it out entirely again and give it to her and be like, this time, if you don't mind, and she never does, or at least she never says she does, can you line edit it for me and get, point out all of my silly errors and the amount of times I say, until over and over again, and just highlight that for me. And once she did that, then I implemented that as much as I could, left it for a while, edited it again, and then I think 2 or 3 more times until it was pretty much there, and then corrected the errors that you sent me in it when you found them.
It was super minor. But I always, I appreciate that when people send me stuff because, the last thing you want to do is have other people that don't know you or aren't also a writer to find it and send it your way. So
it's hugely useful. Thank you.
Yeah, of course, man.
I guess I'm kind of a hypocrite in having my own editing service, yet not having my own novel edited. But from a certain perspective, it's 120,000 words.
It's a lot.
I'm trying to make a career out of getting out of my day job. And the more I chip away financially at that kind of thing, I just thought it's going to get even further away. So if I can get it to a decent stage on my own, then maybe that's suggests I can do the editing, and there's some ability there for me to get a novel or a manuscript into decent shape.
Yeah,
that's my thinking anyway.
I don't think many readers notice that much stuff. I think that I think as writers we're all perfectionists and we want every word to matter. But at the end of the day, I think it's that final 5% or 2% even. It's almost like I know Pixar animation studios has a rule where once they finish a film, they do an extra. I think they call it their final 10%, where it's only for them. They know the audience isn't going to notice it whatsoever, but it's for them as craftsmen, as artists, because they can't let something go out because they're going to see it, and their peers are going to see it. So, it's always that bit that no one's going to notice, but it's important to kind of put in, I think, just for your own sanity.
Yeah. There was a point as well where time became a factor, not as in a deadline, but I've had this for long enough. I've been working on it for long enough. Anything I do now is tinkering. And when you get to a manuscript or get to that point in a manuscript, you start changing things and then you basically need to edit the whole thing again because, and I didn't want to get to that point. So I thought, this is, close enough. It'll do. I've done as much as I can meaningfully on it. So it's just going out and whatever comes of it, comes of it.
Yeah, where there's that quote. I can't remember who it's attributed to, but, art is never finished. It's just abandoned kind of thing.
Yeah.
So there you go, right?
Exactly.
So speaking of time, you mentioned you've been working on this for a very long time. Do you have like a rough idea of the timeline? Like how long did this thing take to complete?
That first 4,000 words was written in 2020, just as we started working from home and the pandemic hit. So I had more time. So I was like, I'm going to write another novel then. And that was about 4,000 or 5,000 words. And then as I said, I let it sit until about 2022, I think. About halfway through 2022, and normally I'm a much quicker writer than that when novels are concerned. But I guess this one is longer, and it took a bit more working out and a little bit more organizing. So that took me a little longer. But momentum-wise, I was writing about 1,000 words a day, maybe 1,500 words a day. But I also put a lot more editing into it as well, and a lot more, I don't know, just messing with the story in one way or the other, or changing this or that, just in small ways rather than big things. So probably 2.5 years of meaningful work is about what I think it took.
I mean,
which
that's
is
a
long for
good
me.
pace, like, 1,000 to 1,500 words a day. I'd say I rarely hit that. And word count for me, I'm not sure if you gauge your progress on word count, but I kind of threw it out the window because it made me feel terrible all the time. And for me, it was more, I tried to start creating milestones based on like a scene
Yeah,
or a chapter
yeah,
or whatever it may be, because then I feel like I got to the end of something, not an arbitrary number.
yeah, yeah. I feel like that too.
Yeah.
Um, Especially if something's really hard. If there's a difficult 500 words, I'm like, all right, I'm done. I've spent enough energy on this for today.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's good enough.
Yeah.
So the dialogue stuff, maybe I could zoom through and write a whole one of those, no problem. But then another scene with loads of description, or a loads of character movement or something that's complicated, I would be like 250, 500. I don't hold myself to a word count target
That's good.
whatsoever. I could write 5 words, and if I'm not feeling it, I just don't. I don't force it. I'm just
Yeah.
whatever. Yeah, I'll come back to it.
So I guess I want to go back to character a little bit too. They're all from very diverse backgrounds, all across the world. The locations take place in very, very far. You have the Arctic, we have Australia, we have these two guys from Finland who are traveling
Yeah.
around. What was there any? I know in the beginning of the conversation you mentioned that you just knew you wanted to have these interconnected stations periodically, right? Throughout the like.
Yeah.
What about the locations? Was that purposeful, or were you like, hey, this seems cool to have somewhere in Thailand? Like, what was the thought behind that?
It came from just looking for interesting
Oh,
places.
okay.
And Thailand, interestingly, came to me because there's in the first Thailand chapter, the character stands by a broken dock, which has a distant island, and that's a real place. That's just an
Mm-hmm.
image I found on I don't know, Google Earth or
I looked it
Google
up. I was
Maps or something like
curious.
that.
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah, it exists.
yeah.
It's not necessarily exactly where I put it, but it's there. And I thought, well, that's cool. I like that. That's also where that character's fear of water came from, because I
Mm-hmm.
thought, well, this must be, a trial to get to that island. I was
Mm-hmm.
actually thinking I wouldn't really particularly want to float my way over there either. So that's where that one came from. Antarctica was always going to be Antarctica, just because of the classic. It's remote. Nobody knows an awful lot about it. It's just a white. Well, I mean, the average person. Some people know an awful lot about Antarctica, but
Yeah.
it's just a white tundra. It was the isolation in that made me want to put that in, and then that carried over a little bit to the Australia section as well, because it's the point I chose for Australia is pretty much as far away from a decent civilization as you can get, or a
Mm-hmm.
settlement of any kind. That's not a real place or a real spot in the country. There's nothing really there, but it just geographically was the furthest away from anything, which made sense when you think about the science of the book, or made some kind of sense anyway,
Mm-hmm.
because it's supposed to be, they're testing things, so they don't want it to be picked up or noticed. So that's why I spread that out a little bit. But other than that, I wanted it to be diverse, so it was interesting. I wanted to go from a tropical jungle in one POV right to Britain, I guess, in another,
Yeah.
in one of the flashbacks. So
Was accuracy ever was did it ever feel like daunting to you to know you are have a very diverse cast from different locations, also different climates. Presumably you've never been to all of these places. I don't know, but
no,
um, is that ever on your mind, or are you of the philosophy that it's not going to matter? The only time that matters is when my story is not working. Basically, if they're not invested with the characters, that's when they're going to start fact checking me.
yeah, pretty much. I do as much research as I can. Well, not as much as I can. I could have done hours and hours worth, but as much as I feel I need to. But I kind of look at it like in this movie studio sort of approach, where you build the set in the middle and you can't see beyond it. So as long as the set that they're in feels authentic, and it feels like it could exist, then I'm usually pretty comfortable that I've done my job with that. And maybe that's a lazy approach. I don't know. Probably is. But I am also so light touch with description that again, I'm not going to get caught out on tiny details being wrong because there aren't really any tiny details in there. It's
Hmm.
just all big picture. I suffer from the old white room syndrome, as they call it, where there's minimal descriptions. That's one of the things I have to add as I go through, because I realize I haven't mentioned any of this stuff in the first draft a lot of the time. So I just make sure that the bounds of what the reader can see feel like uh, authentic. And really, I think giving a bit of movement and a bit of life to them can do a lot. So having somebody moving around in the background or having something distant can draw the eye, as it were,
Hmm.
to that and take the eye off the fact that the paint is the wrong color or the wrong kind of vegetation or something like that. So I don't want to spend a bunch of time doing research for stuff because it's not that, to me, it's not important. That's not
Right.
important to me as a reader anyway.
Hmm.
Um, but maybe it would be if I came from these places, and maybe I should have spent more time to make sure I was reflecting them as authentically as possible. But the places are really just backdrops anyway. It's not inherently, the Thailand portions didn't have to be in Thailand specifically
Hmm.
to in order to make sense. They could have been somewhere else.
Hmm.
So I just wanted it to look nice in the background,
Yeah.
really, and to be good enough. Yeah.
Yeah, I'm sure that you're always going to have somebody pointing out things, specifically if they're from a region. But yeah, I didn't find that
Yeah.
you were incredibly overly detailed of places, so I never felt sort of removed from the story or the location, which
That's
is
good.
exactly what you want. It reminded me of, I listened to this podcast from a, I can't remember what she wrote, but she was talking about specificity geographically, and she
Mm.
she mentioned this cool thing I'll never forget, is that she mentioned, like, oh well, if you're in X town, a weed might just be like blades of grass splitting through the concrete, but like in LA, it might be a palm tree coming through the
Yeah.
ground. So there's weird specificity, I think, that can help at times, but I don't think it's necessary. And I don't know. I agree with you. I think it's more about the experience of the characters, because I feel like if people are poking holes at a book for its accuracy, it's like you've probably lost them in some way, unless it's like historical fiction, in which case I kind of get it.
Yes. Yeah. Yeah.
But
100%.
you clearly weren't trying to do anything like that. So
No, that's the reasons why I kept the science pretty light as well, because I am no scientist, and
yeah,
I knew I couldn't probably get all of that stuff to be 100% accurate, because I mean, it's a fake thing anyway. The parts of infrasound that I've mentioned, kind of true in a lot of ways, but they're not. I wouldn't be tied to any of it, and the way I've used it is not, inauthentic in any way. It's just greatly exaggerated, I suppose, which I suppose that is not inauthentic. But again, it is more character driven anyway, so it's not really supposed to be a focus. It's just a
right.
thing that could happen, so to affect these characters. So
Mhm.
that's the angle I came at it from.
Yeah, and I know early on you mentioned that you didn't do much research about infrasound outside of being inspired by that real life event that may or may not be tied to it. How
Mm.
how deeply did you go into it? Did you go, was it like Wikipedia entry, or did you go a lot deeper than that?
Yeah, I mean, that's where I started.
Hmm.
I'll be honest. After I read Dead Mountain, and it was thrown up as one of the possible causes of that phenomenon, and that sent me to Wikipedia, but that was years ago. And then I realized that there were certain things I could add into it that did have some resources I could look at. For example, there's been studies on wind turbines and whether they cause infrasound, and like there was a study I read about the nearby community that were complaining of headaches and disorientation and stuff like that. So I went down a few rabbit holes with it, and like there's all sorts of stuff. There's something called like a Kármán vortex stream, which
Oh
is
wow.
about wind between two mountains somehow creating infrasound, which is the thing that they think could have been responsible for the Dyatlov Pass incident. So I tried to look at a few different uses or possible things that where infrasound could pop up naturally in a real life scenario. But other than that, I kind of just fictionalized it and left it at that.
It's really unique because I personally didn't know about it. I actually, when I was my wife, she's like, "Oh yeah, she heard about." She's like, "You should ask him about that event," and then you brought it up, and I was like, "Okay, yeah, you definitely already know about it."
Yeah.
But what was so cool about it is I guess normally when we're, I don't want to call this like a global catastrophe book or anything like that, but like the film like Contagion, we're so familiar with diseases or physical afflictions, things we can see and feel, touch, smell, whereas this is purely sound. However, infrasound affects you in many ways, apparently, allegedly.
Yeah.
And it gave it this very just ominous, intangible feeling to it that made it, to me, even scarier, in that regard, because
That's good.
you can't see it, you can't touch it.
Yeah.
You can't even really hear it, I guess. I mean, it's not
Mm.
necessarily audible to the human ear, and so
Yeah.
you're you're uh you're just helpless to it.
Yeah.
There's no cure other
Mm.
than turning it off.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That definitely was interesting to me because I thought it all does stem back from the Dyatlov Pass thing because it's
mhm,
just totally undetectable, leaves no trace, makes
mhm.
no mark. You can't hear it, you can't see it. It's just there, and you'd never know it was happening. Like like a gas leak or something like that. You don't know it's happening until it's too late. That definitely factored into it, and I intended to make a bigger deal out of that. Like it was supposed to be a catastrophe novel of some kind where
Mhm.
it would really start to be large scale in terms of impact. And but I realized pretty quickly I'm just not capable of writing a book to that scale with that amount of action. And it just didn't it took me too close to plot and too far from character, so I pulled it back and just hit what I needed to hit with it and tried to keep it linked to the characters as much as I could and away from the larger scale science, if at all possible.
Yeah, I think you successfully did that, and again, that's sort of what drew me to it as well while I was reading it. Is that I'm very much a character focused forward reader. If there's no characterization or slim characterization, my attention drifts. But
Yeah.
knowing that you were, I mean, it was very intentional that this was a character driven novel, not a sciencey plot driven novel, which is cool because I feel like those are, they're fine. They're not for me, really.
Mhm.
They feel a little bit too light because I like to read a book and kind of, feel that resonance at the end, for lack of a better
Yeah.
word. Just, it hits you and you've kind of lived through these experiences alongside these other people. Um, Speaking of experiences, is any of the people, I know we always say at the beginning of a fiction novel, everything is purely coincidental. Is
Yeah.
there anything in your life or people or things you've seen outside of course, of the research you did on infrasound that kind of made their way consciously? Because we all know subconsciously probably it did, but
Yeah.
anything in that regard?
There's parts like some locations.
Hmm.
So um, there's one of the characters is British, which is I guess the closest thing to my real life, and his university town. When I wrote it, that I was thinking of the university town that I where I went to
Okay.
university. So the locations and the building and stuff. Though it's so light touch and description, you'd never be able to identify it. It could be any of 100 university towns in the country, but that's what I had in mind. That's the most you know autobiographical part of it.
Mm,
Although obviously what happens with him and his upbringing and his story is completely fictionalized. But the
yeah.
office in which he goes to visit his the admin people or whatever, that is written from reality because it was I worked to stand in that office for a while when I was at university, and it was boiling and they had the windows wide open and there was something wrong with the heating. So that's real. Um, Other than that, the rest of it is largely either informed by things I've read or seen or just entirely invented, really.
Mm.
I didn't try to bring a lot of myself to the story, but I inevitably will have. I just made a video. I can't remember which author I was talking about now, but that was one of the things where he said you're always going to bring
Hmm.
yourself into stories, and I kind of find that terrifying, really, because I don't want people thinking that I've written some great hero and thinking, well, he thinks that's himself. Obviously, that's terrifying. I really hope I don't do that. But if I do, it's entirely unintentional.
Yes.
Anyway.
Yeah. Totally. I guess on that note, are there any of the characters? So looking at this novel in hindsight, or maybe your wife, I guess she's like an objective third party. Um, are there any characters that you feel are closer to you, or are they all just kind of a mix of
I
all
think
experience?
I don't have the. I think I'm maybe a mix of Richard and Teppo a little bit,
Okay.
because I have some of the withdrawn parts of Richard's personality and the slightly antisocial, at least in appearance, elements of his characteristics. But then I have all of Teppo's anxiety, all of that stuff. That's 100% me. The being frightened of the world is absolutely, that's me. But yeah, I'm not quite the same kind of. I don't have the same stoicism that Richard necessarily has. I don't have the same. I am largely independent, though.
Mhm.
That is another quality. If I can do something on my own, even if it's 10 times harder than doing it with help, I'll do it by myself. That determination, in spite of yourself, that I also have a bit of that, which I consider to be a weakness, not a strength, by the way.
Mm.
But yeah, that and Teppo's anxiety is 100%. That's me. Yeah.
That's funny because I always wonder. I've read books where you can definitely feel that writers are kind of projecting a little bit, or working
Yeah.
through something, or at the very least identifying something about themselves and putting it out there just to kind of be self-aware. Because I think a lot of people aren't self-aware. I think
Yeah.
it's a good thing. It's a good quality to have. Is there anything else about the novel that you would want readers to know or want to talk through, or I don't know, just any other tidbits regarding it?
Um, I guess that the only thing I was interested in to ask you about is how you feel about the ending, really, because obviously, without going into spoilers,
Spoilers.
it's kind of hard to say, I guess. But I know that some people will have issues with the kind of ending that it is, and other people will really like it. But it felt like the right way to go for me. But
Yes.
yeah, it's
No,
it's hard to say.
yeah, no, I like the ending. Again, I don't want to get into spoilers, but I'm always, endings are so difficult because I know we talked about this earlier, but you mentioned that endings, some people figure out their endings first. I would say that's kind of like I am. Like, for whatever reason, I'll get an image of the ending. I think it's because character arcs are very important to me. Whether they
Uh-huh.
have an arc or a lack of an arc or whatever it is, where they end up at the end of the story. And so I'm always curious to see where these four individuals, I guess, or more, depending on how many you want to count, end up.
Mm.
But yeah, it didn't. I enjoyed it, I guess. I don't want to get into too many details because I want people to read this book.
Thanks.
Yeah, I think that's the
Yeah.
thing, though. It's like you never know what someone is what their impression is going to be once they get to the end, because everybody's a
Yeah.
different reader. Some people are going to be reading for a more heroic ending, a more everything's tightly buttoned up.
Yes.
Some
Yeah.
are reading more for tragic endings. I would count myself in that camp. Like, I would say my favorites are the bittersweet ones, where
Yes.
not everything adds up how you expected. One of my favorite quotes of all time is from Sean Coyne, who's the editor at StoryGrid, and he says, "The ending should be surprising but inevitable," meaning
Yeah.
it should hit you, in a way, but it also should be like make you go, "Yep, this is the
Of
only way it
course.
could have ended." And
Yeah.
I think you accomplished that, so I definitely enjoyed it. You did have an epilogue and a prologue. What was the thinking behind that? Was it just strictly for you wanted to segment these time jumps in a way?
Yeah. The prologue was never supposed to be a prologue. That was the second
Okay.
chapter to begin with.
Okay.
And I realized quickly that I wasn't going to carry on with that point of view because, well, there's obviously reasons why I couldn't continue with one of the points of view in the prologue, because the character dies. I'm just going to say that. It's not much of a spoiler because it
Yeah.
happens in the
Yeah.
prologue.
It's in the
So
prologue. Yeah. Sorry, guys.
yeah, so one of the characters dies, so I can't continue with that. But then the other one, I knew I wasn't going to carry on with because I just I just had that feeling. I
Mhm.
knew I was going to introduce other characters instead. So to have it be chapter 2 and then never seen again felt a bit strange, but also giving the reader a chance to see some kind of effective infrasound up front made sense to me as in terms of overall context for the story. So I thought, well, if I get that in up front, it kind of lets the reader know what the story is all about, what the threat is, what the stakes of the story up front and, in prime position. And then I can go on with that. So with it being shorter and a little disconnected from the rest of the book, I thought, well, this would work as a prologue. And then the epilogue, I just wanted to wrap things up to an extent. But I also wanted to make a point about things not necessarily ending the way that everyone might want them to end.
And that's what I loved about it. It was haunting, the epilogue for me. It had this kind of, we're just coasting through life as participants almost, and so much is out of our control, and it's almost like ghost-like, drifting through the world. And I think that's what I really took away from it. And I can see how certain people, again, they want a more hopeful ending. They want the rah, 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 but it's these kind of endings that really stick with me. And I think that's what we always strive to do. I think, with our books
that's good.
Having,
you sound like I know you are anyway from watching your videos and stuff, but you're the kind of reader that I was really looking for and hoping for this book, like the one that fits, that doesn't mind that I don't hit the conventions and stuff, because it's a character driven story that is what it is, and you either like it or you don't. So to know that landed in the right way with the right kind of reader is perfect. I'm like, I was made up with your review of the book, to be honest. I was really happy with it, because part of me is like, I really respect Jason's opinion on these books. If he hates it, I feel like that's going to cause me some real introversion or introspection that I don't really want to look under that rock. But I was very happy to get that. But the reason I asked so much about the ending in particular is because someone looked at Gold Fury and they were like, well, what happened at the end of that? And like, it's a very, very open story with a very open ending. Again, it wasn't supposed to be any this big thing, but they were like, this novella of flash fiction is too short and the ending isn't clear enough. I'm like, it sort of wasn't supposed to be, but you just can't please every reader, and you can't even please a lot of readers, or most of readers, or the majority of readers.
No, you can't.
Sometimes
I think that's the failing with a lot of writers. They want to be a J.K. Rowling, or they want to be a Rebecca Yarros, where it's like a phenomenon for whatever reason. It hits a chord and everybody loves it, or at least everybody's reading it. And I think, like watching your channel, and then also seeing what you read, and then also reading Gold Fury before Project Ventus, I already knew. I was like, okay, I get this guy. Like I feel like you and I are definitely on the same wavelength when it comes to sort of what we try to do, and then what we enjoy reading, and the stories we want to tell. Part of it is, and I don't know if you feel the same way, you can let me know, but in a way it's kind of discouraging, because I know that I don't write stuff for a large audience.
Yeah. And
I can't undo that. I can't, because of course, who wouldn't want to, like you said, you're trying to push your way forward to get out of your regular day-to-day to do it full time. So the easiest thing to do that, obviously, is to have mass appeal. And when you as well, you've mentioned that that you're not writing for a broad audience. It's again, it's bittersweet, because it's a double-edged sword where on one hand, like, this is important to me or important to you, and I don't want to compromise my vision and the stories I want to tell based on the market.
Yeah.
So
absolutely.
It's and that was really cool that you brought up talking with the literary agents, and how they're saying this is great, but I can't sell this. It doesn't add up. And I think that's one misconception. Not that I've had a lot of experience submitting stuff to agents, but I have a friend who had a great publishing success story. His book didn't sell for anything, but for whatever reason, he got a really great deal, publishing deal. This was it 10 years ago? I don't know. It's a while ago. And so I was sort of like the fly on the wall He would
Yeah.
always kind of let me know how it went, the process, and so anytime I try to, people will say, like on my Discord server, will say like, "Oh, I want to get traditionally published. I'm trying to submit to," and I said, "Well, here's my experience anyway from somebody else who's gone through the whole thing. The
Yeah.
fact of the matter is, it's not about your novel being good; it's about it being marketable,
Yeah.
and that's it. And it's terrible. I mean, I know publishers have to make money." And if
Yeah.
they're writing or if they're selling these kind of off the wall, hard to classify novels, then they're not going to stay afloat.
Yeah.
So,
I definitely get that. I read that article that someone posted in your Discord about the state of publishing and what makes money and how they make their money and how they make their choices. And it was just really eye-opening. I think we all know, but to have the figures to back that up was really, really interesting and
yeah,
disheartening in a lot
yeah,
of ways.
it is.
But that's part of, I've sort of known that for a while, which is why I've gone with the approach I've gone with YouTube and editing and stuff, is because I know I'm never going to be a million copy seller, but it's never going to be I'm not the type of writer. But that's all right, because your value is not in that stuff anyway. Your value
Right.
is, in my opinion,
Yeah.
there's way more value to other things than just whether you have mass market appeal. So,
Yeah.
and I'm trying to convince that of people. I really want people to learn to write for them because they want to do it and to challenge themselves or to communicate something that they want to communicate to whoever does read the books. That's the reason to do it, not the New York Times bestseller list or whatever.
Yeah. I think I think everybody should write a book, regardless of your background. I think it's incredibly storytelling is the oldest form of communication. I feel like with the human species, and it's all in us. It's like when we watch a movie or read a book, and people who aren't familiar with the terms of writing craft, they can't necessarily articulate why something doesn't work for them, but
Yeah.
they know it doesn't work.
Yeah.
And that's just their subconscious, just through our DNA, through time, through being exposed to stories. It's a universal thing, and it's really the only thing I can think of anyway that really just kind of connects us, as a species. And it's so cool to, I don't know. Let me know how you feel about this, but do you find it incredibly cathartic that you write something and somebody across the other side or on the other side of the world is reading it and they're having a personal experience? I mean, that's such a great thing to give someone, right?
Yeah, it's massive. It's definitely one of the main motivators for what I do. Definitely in terms of writing stories and stuff. And when that's what I was coming back to when I said when I make my wife cry, is that it's the same concept. It's like, this thing hurts my soul or whatever, however you want to put it.
Yeah.
And it's someone else to say, yeah, me too. I also get that. It's definitely a huge motivator. But for the YouTube thing as well, the same thing there. If someone messages me and says, like, I had a teacher from Arizona or something message me to say they used my flash fiction video, and I'm not trying to brag or anything, but to show their kids, and a couple of their kids wrote stories on it. I was like, that's great. That's way better than any ad revenue or whatever I could get from making a video about it. It's just passing something along, and not because I'm an expert or because I have all the answers, but because I'm like, hey, this is fun. Maybe, you try it. I think that is where the value is in stuff. And that's why I write character-driven stuff, because it's about the human condition and all these nameless things that you can't put your finger on, and all these unanswerable questions about the nature of life, I suppose.
Well, you feel like you've contributed something that's bigger than you, right? Because you're in your room and you just shoot off this manuscript somewhere, this book, someone picks it up, or video, like you said, and they find it helpful. And that's the best feeling. So like my first novel, it's free on Amazon. I'll periodically read reviews there, and there's been some incredibly moving reviews that will just pop up and say, wow, this reminded me of my friend I lost when I was a kid, or what. And you're like, oh, man, it's such a great feeling, because a lot of people look down on fiction. And I know I'm going on a tangent, or we're going on tangents, but it's totally cool.
Go for it.
A lot of people look down on fiction because you're not learning, quote unquote, learning something from it, because it's made up, right? Whereas my philosophy on fiction is that it's inspiring someone in some way. It's either making them remember something or someone. It's making them have a different outlook on life. Maybe they're having a bad day and it gives them perspective on how to move forward. Like
Yes.
that is so much more valuable than learning about, I don't know, the history of the Middle Ages or something, right? From a nonfiction book
Yeah.
and,
Yeah.
and I think so few people realize that, because I know you've probably read a ton of great books where you just sit there and you're like, wow, that really hit you.
Yeah.
And you're a different person from that point forward.
Yeah.
And I feel like most nonfiction, unless we're talking self-help or something, isn't going to have even close of an impact to that.
I agree, definitely. I've said in a couple of videos before that it's my aim is to, a book can be a friend to someone if they
Yeah.
really need it. It can be a safe place that they can recede into when life is terrible, as it often is. And that, I don't think there's a better gift you can give someone than a story that they can fully get lost into just for a few minutes, just to forget things. The amount of distraction you can get out of a book. Was it the Field, your book that you got reviews on? Interesting fact that I haven't told you for some reason, but I got this tattoo like a couple of years ago, maybe a year ago or something. But I didn't get a tattoo about your book, by the way. But I did.
Damn, you're really gonna blow my mind.
I read almost half of the entire book while I was in the chair, because I was like, I need to sit and I need to read something that I can read and settle into and just be distracted from. So there's all sorts of ways you can give people a gift by writing a book and just help with stuff like that. So, but yeah, I totally get what that reviewer was talking about.
I guess I'd like to ask you, since on this tangent again, what is a book that's really affected you?
There was a few I read when I was younger, and I read them. They were kind of books of a certain ilk that affected my first novel in a way, and they were all like sort of coming of age stories. So I'll give two or three. One of them was Submarine by Joe Dunthorne. They made that one into a movie a few years back, which is pretty good. It's just about a little oddball, kind of socially weird kid and how he's struggling to deal with things. And it was about how there's horrors in his past, or traumas, or just general, feelings that he's not dealing with in the most healthy way. And that was useful, definitely. And then like The Perks of Being a Wallflower, similar kind of thing. I read that and thought, okay, there's some sort of theme to these books that I'm reading. But I always like books about outcasts, and not because I consider myself a total outcast or whatever, but I think you don't get to be a creative person and a writer and stuff if you feel totally safe and secure and happy in everything that you do. And I think there's always an element of trying to understand yourself as you're writing all of your different characters. So those books, I think, were when I really started to pay attention to that area of writing, I guess. And but from a few years after that, probably Station 11, I suppose, just because it straddled that line so well of character and plot, and it was kind of genreless. I thought that I just fell into it. There's just something about the tone of the book or how it's written that I can't really necessarily put my finger on. But like I was saying before, where a book can be a friend, or a book can be something you just settle into in a safe place where you can just go. That book felt like that with me. I've read it like 3 or 4 times. I usually don't read books too often, but it's just something I'm able to settle into and feel, immersed in, I guess. But anything that really strikes at that human condition, and that I can then go, yeah, me too. That absolutely works for me.
Have you read any Kazuo Ishiguro?
Yeah. Yeah. We read The Remains of the Day when we were in high school, which was, I didn't realize how brilliant that was when I was in high school. I took it at face value and I was like, this is really hard to read. This guy won't make a decision. He won't do anything. Now I read it and I'm like, this is brilliant. And then I've got The Buried Giant over there as well, which I really enjoyed that one as well. They have that same kind of settle in and just feel immersed in that quality.
It doesn't ever feel like I find like Kazuo Ishiguro as well as other writers, it doesn't feel like they're rushing to get somewhere. It
Yeah,
doesn't feel like they're trying. Oh, I got to get my hook scene done. I got to hit Act One ending.
yeah,
It never feels that way, and I'd be willing to bet they're not even. They never think of structure. They just write what
yeah,
they're going to write, and they kind of trust their gut. But those are the books that constantly. I'm just in awe of them when I read
yeah,
them. Like Never Let Me Go is one of my favorites of his. Clara and the Sun's another great one. But like, it just feels so effortless.
yeah.
And you're like, I know it wasn't,
Yeah,
but
I'm sure it isn't, but it
I know
feels
it
like
wasn't.
that. It does feel like that.
Yeah. Like I think it was in Austin, Texas. There was a museum of art, and they actually had some of Kazuo Ishiguro's manuscript pages framed with
Right.
his notes on them. So
Yeah,
I thought that was such a cool thing because we tend to think of like, art as paintings or photography or whatever it may be, or sculpture,
yeah,
whereas we don't often create text in a visual, even though it's a very visual thing. Like we don't hang it on the
mm,
wall usually.
yeah.
But I thought that was cool to see that, to
I
see
like
like,
that.
oh, how did he work through this scene? Because
Yeah,
I've read the book.
I suppose there's the effort. You can see that there's effort there, but
Yeah,
how I think that effortless nature of books is. I don't know how they do that. I'm sure, do not know how they do that either, and it doesn't feel like it to them either. I
yeah,
guess it's just from our perspective.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So I think I get the same way with Ian Reid. I don't know if you've ever read Ian Reid's stuff, but
I
he's, I
haven't.
guess, most famous for I'm Thinking of Ending Things,
Right.
which was
Yeah.
adapted to a Netflix film. The books, I enjoy the book a lot more. But I read Foe recently, which also had a movie adaptation, and then I want to read his final one called We Spread. I think it's about kind of, I don't know, dealing with Alzheimer's or memory loss, or it seems really cool.
Mm.
But yeah, there's those few writers that you just they kind of make you feel like you're an imposter, but then also inspire you.
Yeah.
So it's great.
I meant to ask, do you have that one book that spoke to you at any point in your literary career or growing up or anything that you thought this changes things or had an impact that stayed with you that you kind of set your compass by?
Oh man,
It's a
I
hard
guess
question.
I guess for
There's
for
so many
di-
probably.
for different reasons. I think like I always talk about Jeff Vandermeer's Southern Reach trilogy, which to me was kind of mind blowing. Like when I was a kid, I discovered H.P. Lovecraft through a video game, a computer game, and for whatever reason, his mythos, his existential ideas and stuff like that about how
Yeah.
insignificant humanity was kind of like stuck with me. And
Mm.
Vandermeer kind of captured that in a way with that series, but tied it to character. And it's such a beautiful
Right.
story when you get to the end of the trilogy and you can see that it's just like Project Ventus. It's very rooted in character. It's not about spectacle. It's not about an alien world or aliens affecting the Earth or anything like that. Um, yeah, there's so many. It's really tough, but
Yeah.
I feel like
We'll end the call and then you'll think of like five and be
yeah,
like, oh,
exactly,
I should.
exactly,
Yeah. I'm pretty
exactly.
sure I did the same thing.
Yeah, I read Boy's Life by Robert McCammon recently, and that one was just kind of to me, it's like the ultimate coming of age story that it's timeless. It's one of those books that you feel like he put everything into, like
Mm.
his himself, and it takes
Yeah.
place when he was a kid, in the '60s. But yeah, that one really stuck with me, and I think that those kinds of books as well, where they feel timeless, they don't feel like
Yeah.
just anchored to a particular time where you read them and you're like, okay, I can see how this was cool in the '40s or the '50s when it was
Yeah.
written, but now it's a little dated. Um, yeah, it's it's a really tough question. Well, I want to be conscious of your time. I know we're kind of almost going on 2 hours here, so I got a couple more
Okay.
questions from
Yeah.
viewers
Go
out
for it.
there. And I know we probably covered some of this a little bit. So the first question was, how do you go about from the core idea of a story to plotting the novel, any other work, be it a novel, short stories? I know we kind of briefly touched on that, but um, I guess if you want to quickly
Yeah.
reiterate it.
The actual methodology is to use the term extremely loosely, as loosely as possible. It's a physical mess. I'll make notes. Usually I get ideas in the middle of the night or other points, so I'll just make do with writing a note in my phone or whatever, or a notepad. And if that makes sense in the morning, then I know I've probably got something. Because most of the time they're just like, it says like when he goes there, and I'm like, what? What does that mean? So that can be rough. But yeah, it always start really small like that. And then I don't do anything with it initially on purpose. I just leave it. And then if I keep thinking about it and it keeps expanding, then I'll write a mess down in what will be a page one eventually. And anything that I can think of about the story, I'll write down. I use an app called Millernote for that as well now. They were kind enough to sponsor my channel a while ago, and I was using their service already. So it allows you to make a mind map on screen of things. So I'll put a visual image of something representing the story in the middle, and then I'll just build around that. And then it comes to, I'll start to write a chapter at some point and just jump into that, and then the planning goes underneath it. That's how I get from concept to starting something, but the whole picture.
It's a very organic process, it sounds like. Yeah, it's not like a meticulous,
no, I don't have structure. I don't abide to structures or anything like that. Probably would make a big difference to my writing if I did. But I can't look at something and go, right, that's the inciting incident. Now I need to go. I just can't. It's just not the way I write, really. Yeah. So yeah, I'm sure there's value to it, but it's just not for me.
Yeah, I think there's value to it. I feel like it can stifle the story a little bit. It can kind of tell you you're doing something wrong. Yeah. When really there's nothing wrong with any of it. But yeah, I agree with you. So the second question is, does prose matter to you? Do you have a set prose style during writing? Are you conscious on the prose style that you write in a way to match that style, i.e. showing a scene in a certain way rather than simply laying out the information of the scene in a straightforward manner? This is a long question, sorry. Or does that only come later after the scene situation? So it sounds like he's asking, are you conscious of your styling with prose while you're writing, or is it more of like a post thing?
I consider myself quite a clean drafter. I will when I'm writing my first draft, I'm trying to write my 10th draft. I go at it like that. I don't think that'll do for now, and I'll clean it up later. There's no clean it up later. There's change things because they don't work later, but there's if I come up with some imagery or a bit of description, that's what I want it to be, and I'll spend time trying to make it right in the moment, because otherwise I feel like I'll lose the initial bit of inspiration I had for it if I come back to it in a year's time and change it. So I try to be conscious of it, and I try to keep the narrative voice fairly consistent in general across there, but I also try to have a little bit of the character leaking into that at the same time, as much as I can. But I always aim for simplicity where possible, minimal description, because that's just the way I work. A lot of description doesn't work for me as a reader or a writer. I try to just make sure it's interesting and varied, and there's a decent interaction between dialogue and character actions and movement. And yeah, I definitely write the first draft as though I'm writing the 10th, and hope that it works that way rather than fix it up later.
I really like that phrase, because I'm exactly the same. I've tried to do the quote unquote vomit draft where you just get everything out. It doesn't work for me, even though I do NaNoWriMo every year. And there's been some great things that have happened, but yeah, I will cycle on a chapter over and over and over again until I'm happy with it, even though I know, like you said, maybe things will change story-wise down the road. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess it's great to hear you say that. It's making me feel better about like what I'm doing, because it almost feels like all of the advice you get is don't fixate on the prose, don't fixate on the work, the line by line stuff yet. Do that later. Whereas I really like what you said about I need to communicate this how I feel right now, because 6 months from now I'm not going to be in that headspace anymore. Yeah. And I'm going to wonder what the hell that was. And it's going to be different. So,
definitely.
whether or not that's right or wrong, I mean, or good or bad, it is what it is, and it's kind of how you have to go for it. But
it is, and the way you phrase things and word things can also impact the rest of the story. So if you're in the middle of writing a novel, I feel like the way I would write something, even a piece of description at that point, might be, you know, the same vibe, for want of a better word, than other description I've just done or description that I'm going to do. Like if there's a motif that's going all the way through, sometimes that happens by accident. And if you were to write that 6 months later, it wouldn't have that same quality to it. So it just has to be very much in the moment, and then shine up the moment as much as you can afterwards.
Yeah. Get that. Do you ever worry about repeating yourself, like phrases or ideas? Or
Yeah, because I do that. I when reading back, I'll think, oh, that's really good. I'll have no recollection of having written it in a chapter earlier, but then I come to edit it and think, I'm sure I've sort of seen that before, and I'll have to control an F, and I'll discover it, and then have to have a little battle over which is the better use of it, and then find something else for the other one.
Even from book to book. I mean, I'm always terrified that I've explored this idea or used this phrase in something else, and who has the time to go search, you know?
It's impossible. And if any of your readers spots that, then, I mean, I think they're probably likely to be in a tent on your front lawn, like that level of investment in you anyway.
Yeah, exactly.
You got bigger problems.
Yeah, exactly. That's funny. Cool, Matt. Well, the last question I have for you is, what's next? What are you working on? What are the plans for the future?
I've written a first chapter of a Ventus sequel, but I don't think it's going to turn into a book necessarily, because it's been there for a bit. Having said that, that happened with the first chapter of the actual book. That was there for a bit, and then it turned into something else. So I don't know yet, because I think there's places I could go with it, but the end goal isn't clear to me yet. So I don't know whether, and I'm not going to force it, because I don't think anyone's going to finish the book and think, can't wait for the sequel, because I don't think it's that kind of book.
No, I don't think so either.
And I don't want to push it to the point where I'm like, I might as well, because there's stuff I could say. So I'm waiting to see how that goes. But I tried writing an entirely different novel, started that a while ago, and that turned into that 3,000 words short story. So I'm sort of happy waiting for something to occur to me. I'd have got another novel idea that I'm, again, 1,000 words or so into, that I'm also percolating. And I hope that one turns into something, because I like the concept of it, but we'll see. I'm not pushing it, because at the moment I'm snowed under with editing work and YouTube and stuff, and I'm really trying to be at the point where I can take on as much as I possibly can to prove that it will support me. So all of my time's taken up with editing work, which is hugely valuable to me as well, and my own writing processes.
Yeah.
So focusing on that. If stories come to me, I'll jump straight in. I'm ready to do it. I've had a good enough break since Project Ventus, but for now I'm just going to wait and see what happens.
Diversification, I guess, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Cool.
I know that another novel will come along eventually, because they always do. Don't know. It's just the nature of them, isn't it?
Awesome. Any final words for the viewers out there?
I
know. What a terrible question, right?
Just honestly, the most important thing with writing, I think, is just sticking with it. First of all, just don't give up on yourself if you're not perfect at the beginning, because if you're bad at writing to start with, I don't really think that has a lot of bearing on how you'll turn out. Everyone's bad at it to start with, and I think as long as you are willing to search out learning opportunities and sources of learning, and to try things, that's all you fundamentally need. Don't let other barriers get in the way of it, and definitely don't let outside factors and validation and criticism stop you in your tracks. Just do what feels right to you, and you could end up like me with a book that doesn't make sense for any market and isn't written for anyone in particular. So take everything I've just said, reverse it, you should be fine.
But you found a reader. I love the book.
I found one,
You found one at least.
Really grateful for.
I love that that final statement. Yeah, just don't give up. Keep doing it. Don't get discouraged. Don't think you're ever doing anything wrong, because you're going to get a lot of conflicting, advice out there.
Yeah.
So,
To borrow a phrase from the world of video games, if you're encountering enemies, you're going the right way. Is my general
there you
outlook
go.
with
I love that. Wow,
Yeah.
so quotable. Cool, man. Well, I really, really appreciate you taking the time to chat with me. I know you don't do much of
Great
this
to
stuff.
be on.
Yeah.
I really appreciate you giving me the slot, man. It's great to talk to other writers, especially when you are, on a similar vibe, to use that word again.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
great.
Yeah, I feel like you and I are we're on some weird infrasound wavelength, man. So go check out Project Ventus. It's a fantastic book. I'll link all of Kieren's stuff down in the description below. And thanks again, man, for coming on.
Thanks.
All right.
Appreciate it.